"Only Rangers run that fast," Drill Sergeant Henderson had said with a laugh, watching the new recruits struggle through their first-timed run. He was mocking the pale, skinny kid from Ohio who looked like he'd never seen the inside of a gym. But when Alex Morgan shot past the entire platoon like they were standing still, Henderson's laughter died in his throat. The stopwatch didn't lie. Neither did the effortless way the weakest recruit was moving. Something was very wrong, or very right, about Private Morgan. Welcome to Hidden Heroes. Before we continue this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. Fort Benning, Georgia, stood as one of America's premier infantry training centers, where boys became soldiers and civilians learned what it meant to serve their country. The red clay Georgia soil had been churned by millions of boots over the decades, each recruit adding their sweat and determination to the legacy of the base. It was March 2019 when Private Alex Morgan stepped off the bus with 49 other new recruits, beginning what the Army called one-station unit training, 16 weeks that would transform them from civilians into infantrymen. At first glance, Alex looked like he'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. While other recruits carried themselves with the swagger of high school athletes or the quiet confidence of small-town tough guys, Alex moved with the careful precision of someone more comfortable with books than barbells. He was 22 years old, 5'8", maybe 140 pounds on a good day. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on a thin face that looked like it belonged in a computer science classroom rather than an army barracks. When he spoke, which wasn't often, his voice carried the measured cadence of someone who thought before he talked, choosing words carefully rather than letting them tumble out in the usual recruit bravado. His fellow recruits sized him up quickly and found him wanting. "Professor," they started calling him, not entirely without affection but definitely without respect. He was the guy who would wash out in week 3, maybe week 4 if he was lucky. Everyone knew it, including Drill Sergeant Marcus Henderson. Sergeant Henderson was a 20-year Army veteran with 2 combat deployments and the kind of weathered confidence that came from surviving everything the military could throw at him. He'd trained thousands of recruits over his career, and he could spot the ones who wouldn't make it from a mile away. The soft ones, the ones who thought the Army would be like the movies, the ones who'd never been tested by anything harder than a college exam. Alex Morgan fit every stereotype perfectly. "Where are you from, Morgan?" Henderson had asked during the first day's intake processing. "Columbus, Ohio, Drill Sergeant, Ohio State University." "College boy, huh? What did you study?" "Computer engineering, Drill Sergeant." Henderson nodded knowingly. Another middle-class kid looking for direction after college, probably pressured by family to do something meaningful with his life. He'd seen dozens like Morgan over the years. Most didn't last a month. The first week of basic training was designed to break down civilian habits and begin building military discipline. Wake up at 4:30, immediate physical training, followed by a day packed with classes, drill and ceremony, weapons familiarization, and more physical training. For most recruits, it was a shock to the system. Bodies that were used to sleeping in, eating when they wanted, and moving at their own pace suddenly had to conform to military precision. Alex adapted quietly but completely. While other recruits complained about the early wake-ups and the constant physical demands, he simply did what was asked without comment. He wasn't the best at anything, but he wasn't the worst either. He stayed in the middle of every formation, completed every task adequately, and never drew attention to himself, which made what happened on the morning of March 15th so unexpected. It was Friday of the second week, and Henderson had decided it was time for the platoon's first real physical fitness assessment. Not the gentle introduction they'd been doing, a full PT test under Army standards. 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, and a timed 2-mile run. The scores would determine who was progressing appropriately and who needed additional motivation. The push-ups and sit-ups went as Henderson expected. Most recruits scored in the 40-60 range, respectable for civilians who'd been training for less than 2 weeks. Alex scored 67 push-ups and 71 sit-ups. Not spectacular, but solid. Henderson made a mental note that maybe the college boy had been doing some preparation before arriving. Then came the run. Henderson positioned himself at the halfway point of the 2-mile course, a spot where he could observe the entire platoon's progress. The faster runners would lap the slower ones here, giving him a clear picture of who had natural athletic ability and who would need extra work. "Listen up," Henderson called out as the platoon assembled at the starting line. "Army standard for your age group is 15 minutes and 12 seconds. Rangers need to hit 12 minutes and 36 seconds. Most of you college boys will be lucky to break 16 minutes, so don't embarrass yourselves by trying to be heroes." His eyes found Alex in the formation, standing quietly near the back of the group. "Morgan, you setting any land speed records today, Professor?" A few recruits chuckled. Alex just nodded politely. "I'll do my best, Drill Sergeant." "That's what I'm afraid of," Henderson muttered, starting his stopwatch. "Go!" The platoon took off in the usual chaotic surge of new runners, some sprinting out too fast, others settling into what they hoped was a sustainable pace. Henderson watched with practiced eyes, already predicting who would be walking before the first mile marker. Alex started near the back of the pack, his stride looking almost casual compared to the frantic pumping arms and heavy breathing around him. Henderson barely paid him any attention, focusing instead on the obvious athletes who had jumped to early leads. By the quarter-mile mark, the platoon had stretched into its natural formation. The high school track stars and former football players had established themselves at the front, running in a tight pack. The middle group contained most of the recruits, working hard but maintaining reasonable pace. At the back, the strugglers were already showing signs of distress. Alex was somewhere in the middle, still looking relaxed, still not drawing attention. Henderson checked his watch and made notes on his clipboard, tracking times and watching for recruits who might need medical attention. This was routine. He'd run this same assessment hundreds of times. At the half-mile mark, something changed. Alex had moved up in the pack. Not dramatically, not in a way that shouted for attention, but Henderson noticed he was no longer in the middle group. He was approaching the leaders, and he still looked like he was barely trying. Henderson frowned and focused on Alex more carefully. The young man's form was textbook perfect. Shoulders relaxed, arms moving efficiently, breathing controlled. While recruits around him were starting to show strain, Alex looked like he was out for a morning jog. By the 1-mile mark, Alex had moved to the front of the pack. The high school athletes who had started so confidently were now working hard just to keep up with the quiet college boy who supposedly belonged in a computer lab. Henderson was no longer taking notes. He was staring, trying to understand what he was seeing. In 20 years of training recruits, he'd seen natural athletes and dedicated fitness enthusiasts, but he'd never seen someone make running look this effortless while maintaining a pace that was clearly sub-13 minutes. The second mile was where most recruits started to break down. Lactic acid built up in untrained muscles, cardiovascular systems reached their limits, and mental fatigue began to overwhelm physical preparation. Henderson watched the usual drama unfold, runners slowing, some stopping to walk, others pushing through pain barriers with visible determination. Alex pulled away from the pack, not gradually, not with visible effort, but with the smooth acceleration of someone shifting into a higher gear. By the 1.5-mile mark, he was running alone, 50 meters ahead of the next closest recruit. His form remained perfect, his breathing still controlled. Henderson found himself jogging alongside the course, trying to get a better view. This wasn't possible. College boys from Ohio didn't run like this, especially not college boys who looked like they'd never seen the inside of a gym. As Alex approached the final quarter mile, Henderson positioned himself at the finish line, stopwatch ready. The leading group of real athletes was still 200 meters behind, working desperately to close a gap that was only getting wider. Alex hit the final straightaway and, impossibly, seemed to accelerate again. His stride lengthened, his turnover increased, and he covered the last 100 meters like he was running away from something. He crossed the finish line at 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Henderson stared at the stopwatch, certain he'd made a mistake. He looked up at Alex, who was barely breathing hard, hands on his hips in a casual cool-down stance. 11:47, Henderson said out loud, more to himself than to Alex. "Is that good, Drill Sergeant?" Alex asked quietly. Henderson's mind was racing. 11:47 wasn't just good, it was exceptional. It was a time that belonged in Ranger School, or Special Forces selection, or Olympic trials preparation. It wasn't a time that college computer engineering majors ran in their second week of basic training. "Where'd you learn to run like that, Morgan?" Alex shrugged slightly. High school track team, I guess. Nothing special. But Henderson knew better. High school track teams didn't produce times like this, at least not from guys who looked like Alex Morgan. The rest of the platoon began trickling in over the next several minutes. The fastest of the real athletes managed 13:15. Most were in the 14-15-minute range. A few struggled in over 16 minutes, exhausted and defeated. Throughout the remainder of the day, Henderson found himself watching Alex differently. The quiet demeanor that had seemed like weakness now looked like something else. Control, maybe. Discipline. The kind of self-containment that came from having secrets. That evening, Henderson made a phone call to his contact in personnel records. "I need you to run a deeper background check on one of my recruits," he said. "Private Alex Morgan. There's something about this kid that doesn't add up." 3 days later, Henderson got his answer. Alex Morgan had indeed attended Ohio State University, where he'd studied computer engineering and maintained a 3.7 GPA. But what the standard recruit paperwork hadn't mentioned was that he'd also been a member of the university's ROTC program for 4 years. Not just a member, a standout performer who'd earned early admission to airborne school and ranger school upon commissioning. But Alex Morgan had never commissioned. 3 weeks before graduation, he'd withdrawn from ROTC and declined his lieutenant's commission. His academic advisor's notes indicated personal reasons for the withdrawal, with no additional details. The puzzle pieces started fitting together in Henderson's mind. Alex hadn't been lying when he said he'd learned to run in high school, but he'd perfected it in 4 years of ROTC training, including summer programs that were designed to prepare future officers for the Army's most demanding courses. Henderson confronted Alex the next morning during PT formation. "Morgan, step forward." Alex moved to the front of the formation, his expression neutral but alert. "I know about Ohio State ROTC," Henderson said quietly, for Alex's ears only. "I know about your ranger school slot that you turned down. What I don't know is why you're here, playing games with me and my recruits." For the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Alex's carefully controlled expression shifted, not to guilt or embarrassment, but to something Henderson recognized as relief. "I needed to earn it myself, drill sergeant," Alex said quietly. "Not because of a college program or family expectations. I needed to know I belonged here." Henderson studied the young man's face, seeing something he'd missed before. This wasn't about deception or superiority. It was about proving something to himself. "You already had your slot in Ranger School," Henderson pointed out. "You could have been commissioned as an officer. Why throw that away to start over as an enlisted man?" Alex was quiet for a long moment. "Because I wasn't ready to lead anyone else until I knew I could push myself harder than I'd push them. The ROTC program prepared me physically, but it didn't test me. Not really. I wanted to earn my place in the regular Army first." Henderson nodded slowly, beginning to understand. This wasn't about a college boy playing soldier. This was about someone who took the responsibility of leadership seriously enough to ensure he deserved it. "The other recruits don't need to know about your background," Henderson said finally, "but I'm not going to pretend you're something you're not. You want to earn your place? Fine, but you're going to help me train these other soldiers while you're doing it." From that day forward, Alex's role in the platoon shifted subtly. He remained Private Morgan, just another recruit working his way through basic training. But Henderson began pairing him with struggling recruits during PT sessions, asking him to demonstrate proper form during weapons training and quietly acknowledging his technical knowledge during classroom instruction. The other recruits noticed the change gradually. Professor was still the quiet college boy, but he was also somehow the recruit everyone wanted to be partnered with during difficult training exercises. His calm competence became something the platoon relied on rather than something they mocked. Week by week, Alex's influence on the unit grew, not through rank or authority, but through the kind of leadership that emerges naturally when someone consistently performs at a higher standard while helping others reach their potential. Henderson watched this transformation with professional satisfaction. In Alex Morgan, he was seeing what real leadership looked like. Not the flashy bravado of recruits who wanted to be noticed, but the quiet confidence of someone who had prepared himself to serve others. During the final week of basic training, Henderson gathered the platoon for their graduation PT test. By now, everyone knew that Alex would post the highest scores, But the real measure of success would be how much the entire unit had improved. As they lined up for the final 2-mile run, Henderson positioned himself at the starting line instead of the halfway point. He wanted to watch Alex set the pace that would pull the entire platoon to their best performances. "Gentlemen," Henderson called out, "this is your final run as recruits. Tomorrow you graduate as soldiers. Make it count." The platoon took off, and this time Alex didn't hide in the middle of the pack. He moved to the front immediately, setting a pace that was challenging but achievable for the soldiers who had been training alongside him for 16 weeks. Henderson watched as the entire platoon ran tighter formation than they ever had before, each soldier pushing himself to keep up with the standards Alex had quietly established. When they crossed the finish line, the average time was nearly 2 minutes faster than their initial assessment. Alex finished in 11:32, a personal best that would have impressed seasoned Rangers. At the graduation ceremony, Henderson was asked to present the award for Outstanding Physical Fitness Achievement. As expected, the award went to Private Alex Morgan. But Henderson's comments surprised everyone. "Private Morgan represents what we're trying to build in every soldier," Henderson told the assembled families and graduates. "Not just physical excellence, but the kind of character that elevates everyone around him. He earned his place here not because of what he brought with him, but because of who he chose to become while he was here." After the ceremony, Henderson pulled Alex aside for a final conversation. "Your Ranger School slot is still available if you want it," he said. "Your ROTC commander made some calls. The Army recognizes quality when it sees it." Alex nodded gratefully. "I'd like that, Drill Sergeant. I think I'm ready now." Henderson smiled. "You were ready 16 weeks ago, but now you know you're ready. That's the difference between being qualified and being a leader." 6 months later, Henderson received a letter from Ranger School. Private Morgan had graduated in the top 5% of his class and had been selected for immediate promotion to specialist. His instructors noted his exceptional physical performance, but emphasized his natural ability to help struggling students succeed. Henderson kept the letter in his desk drawer, along with dozens of others from former recruits. But Alex Morgan's was different. It reminded him that sometimes the most important lessons in the Army weren't about following orders or meeting standards. They were about understanding why those standards mattered and helping others reach them. Years later, when other drill sergeants asked Henderson about his most memorable recruits, he would tell them about the college boy who could have been an officer but chose to earn his place as a soldier instead. The quiet kid who taught an entire platoon that real strength comes not from dominating others, but from lifting them up. Leadership, Henderson would say, isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about making everyone around you faster and stronger than they thought they could be. This story was brought to you by Hidden Heroes. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance? Tell us in the comments about a time when first impressions proved completely wrong. And if stories like this inspire you, hit that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one.